Hello students! This week we are talking about the life cycle of a frog. I'm very excited. I love frogs. They're one of my favorite type of animals. They are amphibians, which we will learn about more this week. Last week we wrapped up our lessons on the life cycle of a butterfly, and now we're starting frogs, and next week we'll talk about plants and beans. So here's our focus. Our standard is to observe and describe major stages in the life cycle of a frog. Our objective is to investigate the life cycle of a frog. Our essential question: what are the steps in a frog's life cycle? And our vocabulary words are tadpole, frog, egg, and life cycle. So today we're talking about the life cycle of a frog. As we know, our standard is to observe and describe major stages in the life cycles of plants and animals. Last week we talked about butterflies, this week we're talking about frogs, and next we will talk about beans and plants. We know that a life cycle is the way a living thing grows and changes. We talked about the human life cycle a little bit as well. So we start off as babies, and then we grow up and become older, and our life cycle begins again as we have our children, and it starts all over again. A cycle is something that happens over and over again. It continues in a circle. To grow and change, living things need air, food, water, and shelter. The life cycle of a frog. There are 4 steps in the life cycle of a frog. They start off as eggs, then they become a tadpole with legs, then a froglet, and an adult. Now we're going to go through each of those steps. Step 1. They start off as eggs in this part of the cycle. A frog begins life inside a tiny egg. The eggs are in the water. Step 2, they become a tadpole. After they are eggs, the eggs hatch and out comes a tadpole. Tadpoles live in water and they take in oxygen with gills. They are similar to fish in that way. They have gills that take in oxygen from the water. Then to step 3, our tadpole gets bigger, it grows 4 legs, and then later on it loses its tail. So we see the back legs form first, and then the front legs. After our froglet, it becomes an adult frog. The adult frog can live on land or in the water. It hops and it breathes with its lungs. So instead of gills, it now has formed lungs. So it breathes oxygen like we do from the air. Okay, this organizer we are going to be writing about the different stages of our frog's life cycle. I'm writing my name at the top. If you want to print this out, go for it. And I would love to see pictures if you print it out. I want to see what you wrote. You can write what I do, or you can come up with something similar. So, our first stage here, we have our frog eggs. That's how their life cycle begins. They start out as eggs. So a frog begins life inside a tiny egg is step 1. First our egg, then we have our tadpole is the next step. A tadpole hatches and lives in water with gills. So it has gills, which means it takes in the water. It gets its oxygen from the water that it breathes, kind of like a fish. Then we have our froglet, which is step 3. The tadpole gets bigger. It grows 4 legs and loses its tail. Then we have step 4, the adult frog. Hops and has lungs. So, our frog begins its life inside of this tiny egg. Then it hatches and becomes a tadpole. While it's a tadpole, it lives in the water and it has gills. So it's breathing in the water. Then our tadpole gets bigger. It grows 4 legs and it loses its tail eventually. Then it becomes an adult frog. Our adult frog hops around, has lungs, goes in the water, but it needs oxygen from outside. Then our adult frogs can lay more eggs and continue our life cycle. So to wrap up what we talked about today, we watched a little video, did the PowerPoint, and then wrote some things about our frog's life cycle. We know that our frog starts out as an egg, then it hatches into a tadpole, and our tadpole then grows legs, starts to grow lungs, and then becomes a frog. And our life cycle continues. As we know, our cycle is infinite. It keeps going. Our adult frog then lays more eggs, and our cycle continues.